and welcome back to my blog, Part 8 of Sophisms of the Protectionists by the late M. Frederick Bastiat, from Part 2, Sophisms of Protection, second series. This is the second part of two systems of morals. A lot of twos. It may also be remarked that utilitarian morality is not without its influence upon the oppressor. An act of spoliation causes good and evil. Evil for him who suffers it, good for him in whose favor it is exercised. Else the act would not have been performed. But the good by no means compensates the evil. The evil always and necessarily predominates over the good, because the very fact of oppression occasions a loss of force, creates dangers, provokes reprisals, and requires costly precautions. The simple exhibition of these effects is not then limited to retaliation of the oppressed. It places all whose hearts are not perverted on the side of justice and alarms the security of the oppressors themselves. But it is easy to understand that this morality, which is simply a scientific demonstration, and would even lose its efficiency if it changed its character, which addresses itself not to the heart but to the intelligence, which seeks not to persuade but to convince, which gives proofs, not counsels, whose mission is not to move but to enlighten, and which obtains over vice no other victory than to deprive it of its booty, it is easy to understand, I say, how this morality has been accused of being dry and prosaic. The reproach is true without being just. It is equivalent to saying that political economy is not everything, does not comprehend everything, is not the universal solvent. But who has ever made such an exorbitant pretension in its name? The accusation would not be well-founded unless political economy presented its processes as final and denied to philosophy and religion the use of their direct and proper means of elevating humanity. Look at the concurrent action of morality, properly so called, and of political economy. The one inveighing against spoliation by an exposure of its moral ugliness, the other bringing it into discredit in our judgment by showing its evil consequences. Concede that the triumph of the religious moralist, when realized, is more beautiful, more consoling, and more radical. At the same time, it is not easy to deny that the triumph of economical science is more facile and more certain. In a few lines, more valuable than many volumes, J.B. Say has already remarked that there are two ways of removing the disorder introduced by hypocrisy into an honorable family: to reform Tartuffe, or sharpen the wits of Orgon. Molière, that great painter of human life, seems constantly to have had in view the second process as the more efficient. Such is the case on the world's stage. Tell me what Caesar did, and I will tell you what were the Romans of his day. Tell me what modern diplomacy has accomplished, and I will describe the moral condition of the nations. We should not pay 2 milliards of taxes if we did not appoint those who consume them to vote them. We should not have so much trouble, difficulty, and expense with the African question if we were as well convinced that 2 and 2 make 4 in political economy as in arithmetic. M. Guizot would never have had occasion to say, France is rich enough to pay for her glory, if France had never conceived a false idea of glory. The same statesman never would have said, liberty is too precious for France to traffic in it, if France had well understood that liberty and a large budget are incompatible. Let religious morality, then, if it can, touch the heart of the Tartuffes, the Caesars, the conquerors of Algeria, the sinecurists, the monopolists, etc. The mission of political economy is to enlighten their dupes. Of these two processes, which is the more efficient aid to social progress? I believe it is the second. I believe that humanity cannot escape the necessity of first learning a defensive morality. I have read, observed, and made diligent inquiry, and have been unable to find any abuse practiced to any considerable extent that has perished by voluntary renunciation on the part of those who profited by it. On the contrary, I have seen many that have yielded to the manly resistance of those who suffered by them. To describe the consequences of abuses is the most efficient way of destroying the abuses themselves, and this is true particularly in regard to abuses which, like the protective system, while inflicting real evil upon the masses, are to those who seem to profit by them only an illusion and a deception. Well then, does this species of morality realize all the social perfection which the sympathetic nature of the human heart and its noblest faculties cause us to hope for? This I by no means pretend. Admit the general diffusion of this defensive morality, which, after all, is only a knowledge that the best understood interests are in accord with general utility and justice. A society, although very well regulated, might not be very attractive where there were no knaves, only because there were no fools. Where vice, always latent and, so to speak, overcome by famine, would only stand in need of available plunder in order to be restored to vigor, where the prudence of the individual would be guarded by the vigilance of the mass, and finally, where reforms regulating external acts would not have penetrated to the consciences of men. Such a state of society we sometimes see typified in one of those exact, rigorous, and just men who is ever ready to resent the slightest infringement of his rights, and shrewd in avoiding impositions. You esteem him. Possibly you admire him. You make him your deputy. But you would not necessarily choose him for a friend. Let then the two moral systems, instead of criminating each other, act in concert and attack vice at its opposite poles. While the economists perform their task in uprooting prejudice, stimulating just and necessary opposition, studying and exposing the real nature of actions and things, let the religious moralist, on his part, perform his more attractive but more difficult labor. Let him attack the very body of iniquity, follow it to its most vital parts, paint the charms of beneficence, self-denial, and devotion, open the fountains of virtue where we can only choke the sources of vice. This is his duty. It is noble and beautiful, but why does he dispute the utility of that which belongs to us? In a society which, though not superlatively virtuous, should nevertheless be regulated by the influences of economic morality, which is the knowledge of the economy of society, would there not be a field for the progress of religious morality? Habit, it has been said, is a second nature. A country where the individual had become unaccustomed to injustice simply by the force of an enlightened public opinion might indeed be pitiable, but it seems to me it would be well prepared to receive an education more elevated and more pure. To be disaccustomed to evil is a great step towards becoming good. Men cannot remain stationary. Turned aside from the paths of vice, which would lead only to infamy, they appreciate better the attractions of virtue. Possibly it may be necessary for society to pass through this prosaic state where men practice virtue by calculation, to be thence elevated to that more poetic region where they will no longer have need of such an exercise. More tomorrow. Make it a great day, and bye for now.